So we're going to talk about my favorite subject, other than Jesus, obviously, but math and Jesus, what a great combination. I am a scientist and an engineer, so obviously I like math. I've taken pretty advanced math. I know most of you are probably groaning. But if you noticed in the handout, there's a lot of pretty pictures. I think you will see that. The main idea we want to talk about today is, does the concepts and functions and complexities of math point us to a creator? Yeah, I think it does. I mean, the premise that we'll talk about is the fact that math is conceptual, it's metaphysical, and yet it mimics what we see in the physical world. Naturalists usually deny that there is a metaphysical world, but all their concepts come out of the mind, which is metaphysical. So they actually tend to counter their own arguments and cancel them out on their own. So we'll kind of let them do that. We're going to try to look at both pluses and minuses. I want to see what the atheist has to say so we can try to counter their claims. And we're going to be walking through both the why and the why nots that people say about the evidence for God. Obviously, as Christians, we believe these are evidences for God, but people challenge our views, and we should always be open to those challenges. Part of the advantages of looking at the critiques or the challenges of our faith is when we can talk about and discuss and understand the counter to those critiques, our faith gets stronger. You always get stronger in your view if you can handle the critiques. I mean, I always say I won't get ahead of myself, but we're going to be talking basically assuming people are struggling with God. You know, we got to always know where they are in our continuum when we have one of these conversations. And we're going to be talking about some of the 101 plus evidences for God that I've talked about. We'll be focusing on math. I won't do Aquinas' 5 reasons today, just don't have time. I actually don't know how long this is. I didn't ever practice it, so we'll see how we go. But we're always going to be looking at the counter so that we know how to address their concerns, their misconceptions, and their doubts. And their arguments against the evidence that we see clearly points to God is always going to fall into these categories. And that's one of the things I want to try to point out as we go through the class is the atheist perspective is consistent in the fact that they always fall back to the same set of arguments against what we present to them. Yep. It's a small number, and it basically is when they don't know, they just say there's nothing to see there. You know, it says don't worry about it. That's your brute facts or your necessity arguments. Or they'll say they're doing science when they're really doing philosophy. And that's what we want to watch out for when we see their counters to the evidence that we're going to be talking about. How are they framing it? And then that exposes the weakness in their arguments, okay? It's all right. But we're going to look at pros and cons, right? Because I think that's the only way to be intellectually honest is to look at both sides of the arguments. So math, fractals, logic, reason, that's the topic, as boring as you guys may think it is, but I hope I can change your mind. I love this stuff because, well, it's what I've been doing for 40 years. But we need rules of engagement. Anytime we get into a discussion, and you should do this if you have an atheist friend or colleague or someone, and then you get into a discussion, you don't have to set it up like this, but you have to actually establish a framework for that conversation, or it just becomes my argument, your argument, back and forth, you will accomplish nothing. So for our purposes, we're going to talk about the critiques of viewpoints. You know, I believe, and this is a premise I use in my own personal studies, is I want to look for the strongest critique about or against the thing that I believe in. Because I know if I can address that critique, my view got stronger. Most people run away from the critiques. They don't want to see what disagrees with their view. And sometimes you're going to find out you're wrong. And guess what? That means you can change your view and then you can be right again. So it's always a good thing. And we're going to apply what I call equal burden of proof. Generally in a discussion, whoever makes the claim is responsible for providing evidence for that claim. But in this forum, I think we should be equal on our footing. So we're going to make claims, and we're going to see how the atheist counterclaim looks. And the level of scrutiny for both of those should be equal. So if they're going to dismiss a certain path of logic, they can't turn around and try to use it to support a different view. And that's what we're really trying to look at, is there is logic and reason that should be used consistently, regardless of what your argument is. And we'll see one tonight that they use constantly to establish the so-called proofs of evolution. Yet when I use it to prove God, they're going to say, no, you shouldn't use that argument. It's the same logic and reason. So I'll point that out when we get there, because it's exactly what the evolutionists, the origins of life, the old universe models all use this same logic and reason, because you can't see any of those things. It's a philosophy. You have to make assumptions. Okay. And so I think I'm not going to do this in each of the sessions going forward, but I think it's good for us to always understand that as Christians, we have bias. You might think you're not biased. That just means you're biased, okay? Biasness is the things you come to the table with. It's your starting point in a discussion. And as Christians, when it comes down to math and reason and logic, we believe it can be understood by our mind because it comes from the mind of our Creator. Our universe can be understood because God made it that way, right? And we're made in the image of God so that we can process things the same way that God has designed things. So we also believe in both the physical and the metaphysical. Metaphysical are things that are just in your mind. They're concepts. They're things you can't touch or feel or even observe. As Christians, we believe in both. Now, as a naturalist, they have a different set of bias. They believe math, reason, and logic are necessities. There's no deeper meaning. They have to be this way because of the universe we live in has it. So it's just the way it is. It's brute facts argument is what it is. That's their bias, that there's just nothing more to look at. We disagree with that, and we'll talk about why that is. And then one of the weaknesses of the naturalist view is they only believe there's a physical realm. They don't believe in the metaphysical. It's only physical. It's only natural. The problem is all the concepts they use are philosophy, which is metaphysical. The concept of evolution is a thought. We can't observe it. We can't see it. We can't prove it. It's metaphysical, okay? And I'll prove that numbers and science are really metaphysically based. We're using a concept of our mind to process the physical world. Metaphysical and physical are almost always overlaid, because your mind is not just chemistry, no matter what they tell you. So we're start with logic. I know everybody's going to love this. This one's a little tough. I'm just going to use one example for the way logic kind of points toward God, okay? This is called the contingent chain. I know you don't know the term, but everybody uses it. Effectively, it means A causes something that makes B, causes something that makes C. It's like following a recipe to make a cake. That's a contingent chain. As a Christian, we believe there's what they call the necessary ground. That's the starting place. That's the first cause. There has to be a point that's outside of the chain that initiates this chain in its movement, right? So an infinite chain of borrowed existences, which is what our existence is, right, never becomes self-existent merely because you add length to the chain. That's the Christian concept that billions of years doesn't really help them. They always have to have that necessary ground, that first cause in all the different scientific models that they'll say for the existence of the universe or the origins of life. Or go ahead.
Can you read that in layman's?
Okay, let me go forward a little bit. I know the logic is tough, okay? So the Christian view would be that it identifies God, right? God's a necessary cause. A contingent chain is just like, think of it like following a recipe, right? Point A is required before I get to point B. Point B is required before point C. So there's a chain. We see this over and over in our existence. But there's always something outside of that chain that started the chain in motion. That's what we call the necessary ground. And that's where the naturalist and the Christian deviate, well, as long as we don't call the necessary ground God, they'll agree with us. Because everybody knows this is the way it works.
But what is their necessary ground? What do they say?
Like the Big Bang.
There's nothing to see here.
Bang theory.
Yeah, they'll say Big Bang for the universe, origin of life.
But his point is that like they don't really have an explanation for
Right, I
the
understand.
Big
What,
Bang,
I understand. I'm just saying, what are they saying is their necessary?
Yeah, so if it's evolution, they'll say we come from monkeys, right, or bacteria. You talk about origins of life, you say, well, there's some chemistry that was in a pool someplace on Earth and lightning struck it and then boom, now we have life. The problem is, as you roll back, you really look at their contingent chain. It always gets to a point where there's a gap. Something outside of that chain has to take place in order for that chain to even get started. And we don't agree the chain even exists in the case of evolution, but that's for a different day. We'll talk about that. But
So am I necessary ground when I start to make the cake?
yeah, you're initiating. You gathered the ingredients,
So I would be the necessary ground.
but those ingredients could be used for lots of different things, right? Right. So yeah, you're the necessary ground in that example, which is a little simplistic, but it's the idea that it's got to be something outside of the chain that initiates the chain. Yeah, and it's one of these things that's it's kind of obvious to us functionally in the world. I mean, there has to be a starting point to a sequence of events that take place. But if you always run it back, it ends up with absurdity. There has to be something beyond what naturalism says. And that's the reason this is an evidence for God according to Christians. We believe that necessary ground has to be God, right? The ultimate necessary ground. But the atheists are going to counter us. They're going to come with a couple of different paths of arguments. There's different views. One's going to be the anthropic one. Anthropic just means it's human-centered. They will say, well, it appears this way because this is the only universe we can actually observe, and it's the way it is. And nowadays, they'll always morph it into the multiverse weird concept that there's infinite different possibilities that will have different outcomes. And we just are observing the one that we're observing, so therefore, it's just the way it is. And that is a whole lot of hand-waving with no thought. There's no reason to that. That's imagination, okay? Their concept is, yeah, we know that there has to be an initiating cause, a necessary ground. We don't know, but it can't be God. That's really their view. And if you don't like that one, they'll go, okay, what? Yeah. They'll talk about, and I know this is even more logic, they talk about no agreed priors. That means they'll just truncate the chain and say, well, nothing happened before that. What are you guys talking about? We can't see it, we can't observe it, so there's nothing. It just is. And that'll be one of the arguments you hear from very smart scientists. When pushed into a corner, you'll get, well, that's just the way it is. Why is it so illogical to you? Because you're using logic, you're using philosophy.
That's how we see God.
That's exactly how we see God. So part of our job, especially with the modern scientists, is show them that we're on equal ground. Now let's look at what's the best explanation for what we see. Okay, we're on equal ground. I would say the logic and reason really puts us on equal ground. I think it leans toward the existence of a supernatural ultimate cause. That just makes more logic and reason to me. But you have to build this case with more than one piece of evidence. So this is also a little bit of a logic argument. Wigner was, in 1961, he's a physicist, and he got really famous because he put into words what I think everybody else already knew, that the enormous usefulness of mathematics in the natural sciences is something bordering on the mysterious. In fact, I've heard it quoted differently, that he calls it miraculous. I mean, why is this? Well, that's a really good argument for God, actually, if you think about it. Why is it that math fits our natural world so well? How can we model things? That's a metaphysical, and you're able to see and model and predict things in the physical. So as a Christian, we're talking about the intelligibility of the universe. Intelligible just means you can figure it out, right? You can think about it. And we have very complicated math that we have developed in science and mathematics that can model things that happen in the universe, in our world, that we can observe. And so there's an inference here that I think Wigner was getting to. He never got to it in his lifetime, but that there has to be some sort of inferred rational source of mathematics in order for them to model the real world so well. And I think our argument usually goes like this. It's something like, so a theist would say that math seems to explain not only just the world that we live in, but the question is, why can we actually decipher the world with mathematics? It's one thing to describe it with mathematics, but you can actually decipher things with mathematics. Through mathematics and science, we have discovered things that if it wasn't for the math, we wouldn't even know to look for it. So there's this weird combination, again, the metaphysical and the physical, conceptual and the real, overlapping, and the question is why? And the naturalist doesn't have an answer for this, but the first thing the atheist is going to do is going to say, why are you surprised? I mean, seriously, I've seen this in debates. It's like, why are you surprised? Math was designed to do exactly this. Exactly. Exactly. But most of these counter arguments are meant to be distractions. They're meant to catch you off guard and get to a different topic because they can't win this topic. Okay, they can't win it. And another one, and this is one that is, it's called the incoherent argument because they'll prop themselves up in their PhDs and whatever else they got, and they'll say, well, I'm just smarter than you. Your argument makes no sense. Makes no sense. It's incoherent. Your definition of who God is doesn't match what you're talking about. These things don't match. Your argument is completely incoherent, so I can dismiss it, even though I can't argue against it. And this is a very classic atheist argument against the things that we consider to be truths and evidence of God. Because I can't argue against it, I'll just say that you guys are just crazy to think about that. It's like, what about it is crazy? It's just crazy. And that's where you deviate from logic and reason. So I know that is kind of quick through logic and reason, but they're not using logic and reason, is I think the moral to the story. If anything, we're on equal ground. I think it leans toward theism. Well, that brings me to